I welcome you all here this afternoon. It's a great turnout for our program honoring Women's History Month. And Anne came up with this idea of women in Rutland who have been influential and in the past, and they have a earmark on our daily life today. So thank you ladies for participating. They've been working on this for the last couple of months and studying their role play and so forth, so they've done a great job. I want to thank them. And also I want to remind you about upcoming programs we're having. In April, we have two events. April 12th, the building will be open for browsing, just general open house for the public. And then on the 14th, that same week, we have our annual history play with Judith Caloric. She'll be portraying Rachel Revere. So that's sponsored by us and the Rutland Cultural Council. So I hope you can attend. It's a very popular event. Judith is world known. She goes all over the world and country performing and portraying women of history. So with that, Anne, do you have anything to say?
I do. So welcome. You have really outdone yourselves in our support. Thank you so much for coming. I think we can, I don't know, I hope you can all see or hear, so the ladies are going to have to speak up very loudly. So I'm Ann Davis, co-curator with my husband Scott here at the Historical Society. We'd like to thank first our cable people for being here today to preserve our program. We appreciate you taking time. And let's meet our portrayers who have researched their characters. Their research that they did will be kept here at Historical Society in the genealogy files, so it will not go to waste. We have Pat LaChance as Linda Hamp, Karen, come on, Lynn Amsden, portraying her mother Irene Amsden, Leah Oliver portraying Charlotte Judkins, Jen Cooney portraying Madame Jamel, Lynn Turcott portraying Frida Kelsey, Helen Calkins, Beth Hussey portraying Helen Calkins, Lynn Patterson portraying her mother, Janet Barakian, and no.
Sounds like I haven't known you my whole life, right?
Pam Leviton, and she's portraying one of her ancestors, Maddie Smith. So we do have one more in your program, and she is not feeling well, Ruth Lambert, and we send her best wishes today, but she will not be participating. If you would silence your cell phones, that would be really appreciated. As long as there have been women in Rutland, there have been influential women. Some of our earliest ones were Moses Howe's wife, Eunice, who gave birth to the first male child in Rutland. Sarah McCarter was a single woman, and she was the first to own land in Rutland during the first division of land, and that was very unusual for a single woman to own her own property. There was Mrs. Moulton and the suffragettes who met in the Congregational Church to plan what they were going to do for women's rights. Rena Alanovi and 8 other women who enlisted in World War II from Rutland. Dorothy Donnelly qualified for the 1940s Olympic swim team. Unfortunately, the games were canceled because of World War II, but she went on to win many, many international and national events in swimming. Eunice Marsh was sick for 7 years with tuberculosis, but she bravely volunteered as one of only 12 people in the United States to try a new drug called streptomycin as a TB cure. Her niece, Leah Marsh Oliver, who's with us today, said she lived to be in her 90s, so I guess the drug worked. Now let's meet our own ladies. Who was born in Rutland?
Well, I'm Linda Hamp, and I was born in 1895, and I lived in Rutland all my life, right on Maple Ave, where Bob and Timber is, and then I later moved to 30 Maple Ave. So I guess you could say I'm a Rutland native. My mother was Frances Putnam, and she was an ancestor of General Rufus Putnam. And Lewis Hamp, he had come from Wisconsin to paint the Muscapog house, and they were married and had our family, and he became town clerk and just passed on the town clerk duties.
I was born here in Rutland on October 14th, 1872. My family came here in 1718 with the original settlers. My home was originally built by my grandfather in 1830 as a hotel and was located on the corner of Wachusett Street and East County Road as a stagecoach stop for the Worcester King Railroad route. My father remembers this fondly and had many stories as we were growing up. This was short-lived, however. The center of town became more popular and drew the crowds with the hotel and more comfort that the center could provide.
I was born in 1912. My parents were Clifford and Mercy Upham Wheeler. I had 4 sisters, Florence, Ruth, Mercy, and Edna. I came from a long line of Wheelers dating as far back as the 1700s.
How did the rest of you get to Rutland? Frida?
I was born in Wenham in 1897, and I came to Rutland with my husband in the 1920s. He was a teacher and he became principal of the Rutland High School, and he held that job until the to Wachusett opened, and he went down there as a guidance counselor.
I was born in Worcester. I'm the daughter of Josephine and Robert Torpy. I met my husband Robert at the VA hospital where we both worked. He was in the kitchen and I was the secretary to the administrative assistant. We were married in 1949 when we moved to Rutland.
I'm Helen Calkins. I was born in Newport, Vermont, on the Canadian border in 1922. I met my husband-to-be in Washington, D.C. during the war. We both attended the same congregational church and belonged to a group for young people called the Scooby Club. There was a dance where the woman invites the man. Nelson was actually my second choice, but it turned out he was the right choice. We were married in November of 1946, and we moved into the second floor of Windy Maples, the Calkins homestead where Nelson's parents lived. I didn't grow up in real country like Rutland was, but I loved it and quickly learned to do things like helping the family rake up the hay fields after they were cut.
Hi, I'm Janet Barakian, and I was born in Jefferson, not too far from here, as we all know. I was born in 1936. I was a member of the first graduating class of the Wachusett Regional High School. I was the first of us to all go there. I was a senior when it became regionalized, so I knew a lot of Rutland people. I met my husband, Richard Barakian, who was from West Boylston. We were married and came to Rutland in 1968.
I'm Madame Jumel. So I was born in 1775 in Providence, Rhode Island. Our family was very, very poor. So I actually lost my brother and my father in a terrible ship accident. So that left myself, my mother Phoebe. She remarried. She married someone named Jonathan Clark, and they had my half-sister Polly. So because we were so poor, we were pushed from town to town. We ended up in towns in Massachusetts, and then we eventually ended up in Rutland. And we were in Rutland for 3 years. We lived in a dugout cave, which is the best way you can explain it, at the bottom of Goose Hill, not too far from here. We lived there for those 3 years, and then eventually moved out of Rutland and returned to Providence.
Some of you were educated through high school, took some classes pertaining to work, and some of you have college degrees. Can you tell us about your education?
Well, my graduating class was from Rutland High School in 1914, and there were only 11 students in that class.
So I didn't actually have a formal education, despite how well I managed to get through life and make a life for myself. So we were simply too poor. We didn't go to school. My sister and I, neither of us went to school. But my stepfather, Jonathan, even though he was a bit of a drunk, he was educated himself, and he taught my sister and I to read and write and do math. And so that was one of the wonderful things that he brought to us, despite it being a little bit of a tough upbringing with him as a stepfather.
My father continued to find ways to supplement our income and give back to our town. He sold some land to the town for a schoolhouse in 1852, and that was used for about 40 years. This is where I went to school, and it was just a nice short walk from our farm. It would later be abandoned, and I would use it for the railroad. My father also sold some land to the railroad, and they built a flag station across from the schoolhouse in 1887. I always liked to work outside and get my hands dirty. I helped him out when I could between lessons. It was an easy stop to the station on the way home from school. I would help him keep records and plant flowers and trees. My mom, I'm sure, would have preferred that I tend to my needlepoint, or help her out in the kitchen, but I longed for the open air, and she couldn't tame my spirit. And my father would encourage me. Well, maybe he just needed my help, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I enjoyed spending time with him, and the land was my school.
I graduated from Commerce High School in Worcester with another Rutlandite, Edmund Buckowitz. After becoming town clerk, I took a 3-year course from Salve Regina College to become a certified municipal clerk.
At a time when women were expected to grow up and become homemakers, and before they even had the right to vote, I graduated from Fitchburg Normal School in 1917 and became a teacher, and I was a career teacher. I taught all the way up until 1961. First in Vermont, then in Barry. Then I became principal of the Paxton Center School, and I ended my career here in Rutland. I taught for 15 years in the Rutland Junior High School.
My father had started a newspaper in Newport, so it was only natural that I went to school for journalism. I attended Syracuse University, and from there was enlisted in the Navy. Later on, after my children were more independent, I attended Worcester State College, where I earned a master's degree in library science.
One of you had a very interesting wedding, or should I say weddings?
So my first marriage was to Stephen Jumel. So we met in North Carolina in 1795. It was one of the many places that my family relocated to. He owned plantations in the Dominican Republic, so he had amassed a massive fortune by trading with the West Indies. He had plantations, he had slave populations, he had a lot of land to himself. So he has an interesting story though. So he had a slave on his plantation who he trusted very much. He wanted to promote this slave to more of a supervisory role. So he taught him to read and write. And that backfired because that slave started reading revolutionary texts and got the idea to revolt against all the white men who were running these plantations. And so he did. And it was a very dangerous time. But because my husband had been so good to him, teaching him to read and write, he was allowed safe passage out of the Dominican Republic. So my husband went to New York City. He had one ship with trade items still on it, so he used that to rebuild his fortunes. Something that really attracted me about Stephen was this exciting life of travel that he had. That was not something that I had. I knew that he was enamored with me, so I actually asked him to marry me, which was not something that women did at the time. But he said no. But I insisted that this is what I wanted, and he said that he would care for me. He just didn't want to marry me. So I am a little bit known for my scheming. So while he was away in Philadelphia, I sent word to him that I was deathly ill. I was definitely going to die. And so he returned from Philadelphia, and I told him, you know, the only thing that I really want is to be married before I pass. And so we were engaged, and I miraculously recovered within a week. It was fabulous. Can you believe that? And so that was, so we married. The papers talked about how beautiful I was, which was very nice. We did live in New York City for some time, for a very long time. So there was a mansion in Harlem that I saw that I wanted. And so I asked Stephen to buy it, and he did. Commonly known as the Jamel Mansion. It is the oldest house in New York City. This house actually used to be General George Washington's headquarters in 1776. And it was here that I learned that I am a natural in the matters of business. I am very, very good businesswoman. And so Stephen actually allowed me to act on his behalf and manage the properties in New York City. And I grew our property list to over 1,400 properties that we managed. So we were doing very well, in a large part due to my abilities. And we lived a very comfortable and exciting life. We actually moved to Paris for a time, and we lived the life of luxury until we outspent a little too much. And so we returned to New York City to continue building up that wealth. Stephen eventually passed, and we had been married for almost 30 years. He was in a terrible carriage accident. But only 1 year later, I started being pursued by the one and only Aaron Burr. So I eventually gave in because I really just needed a man around the house. And he kept coming over to my house, and it was turning into a bit of a scandal, so I said, okay, fine, we'll marry. But Aaron was terrible with money, absolutely terrible. I believe he was only interested in me for my fortunes. So he was sore after losing the presidency. He became vice president. He took my money from an investment that I had made in Connecticut, the money I had made off that investment. He began to invest in a scheme in Texas to buy up land, bring in Germans and other foreign nationals to vote for Texas to become its own country, and he would be their president, which obviously that failed terribly. That's how I lost my money, so that was the final straw. We'd only been married a few months, and I kicked him out of my home. Our divorce actually went through on the very day he died, and I paid the difference.
A few of you either served in the military or served to honor those who did. Can you tell us about that, Helen?
During World War II, I served in the Navy. I was a photo specialist second class stationed in Washington, D.C. I always told my family I had a desk job during the war because we were sworn to secrecy about our actual role, which involved decoding encrypted messages. Although I was only in D.C. for a few years, it had a tremendous impact on the direction my life would take.
I was past president of the Women's Auxiliary of the American Legion. My husband had been a second lieutenant in World War I in the field artillery.
I was also an auxiliary member. My husband Judd and I wrote several Rutland service people who were fighting in World War II. Eventually those letters were more frequent, and we were published in a paper called the Rutland Post. It kept the soldiers and their family up to date on their war efforts and what we were doing. We hope it raised their spirits as well. I also volunteered to spot planes from the cupola of the old fire barn. Later, in 1981, in celebration and tribute to the hostages being released in Iran, I organized and rang the church bell in the steeple, one for every hostage.
Many of you worked in Rutland. Opinions on working women have changed over the years. What did you do, and how was it received? Charlotte?
Well, I worked at the VA hospital and the post office. They had their own address, and later I worked in the Rutland post office. And when my children were grown, I drove a school bus, and I loved seeing most of the kids.
Well, my great-grandfather, Rufus Putnam, and not the famous one, but an ancestor, and then my grandfather, George Putnam, my father, Louis Putnam, and at his death, my mother, Frances, were all town clerks. one after another. And then in 1949, I became the next one in line, and I was elected the next town clerk of Rutland. My father's photo is on the wall there, Lewis Hamp. He's right over there on the desk. That's Lewis. He was a very influential man. And he made very many contacts during his tenure as town clerk, especially in Boston and in the political scene. So Rutland was always updated on the latest updates to the town laws and town clerk's duties and election notices and so forth. My sister was Hazel Hamp, and she was married to the famous Franklin Woods and lived in the same house that we're in right now. And when she passed away, she donated this building to the town of Rutland. We're sitting now in her living room, and then at one time the police station was here on the other end of the building. The town clerk's office, however, was in our home for many years until they built the town community hall in the 30s. So the town clerk's office was at 23 Maple Ave, which is currently where Quabbin Timber is. And growing up, I always helped my parents with the various duties and filling out applications and so forth. So it was natural for me to run for the position. I was also the town librarian. It was on the main floor of the community hall, right now where the town clerk's office is. And so the town felt I was a very capable person, and our family had a tenure of being the town clerk in Rutland for over 100 years.
From 1963 to 1966, I was the secretary to the selectmen and the planning board. So when Linda Hamp retired, I ran for town clerk and I won. I made some space in a room on the first floor of our house at 156 Main Street, and the highway department brought all of the town records, everything from Linda's house to our house, which was boxes and boxes of town records, file cabinets, large books of birth, death, and marriage certificates. Everything came to the house. There was 250 years of documents that had to be moved from Linda's house to our house. And as I was trying to organize everything, the phone kept ringing because people had loads of questions, as they probably still do. And all I kept saying was, I'll call you back when I can find the record. I was overwhelmed, and I just kept calling Linda, come help me, I need help.
Oh, call me anytime, Irene. You'll do just fine.
Thanks, Linda. After years of townsfolk walking through our home with a husband, 4 children, and a dog, trying to function, my husband Bob made a room in the basement with an outside entrance. I retired from that position in 1991. In 1972, when the library was built next to the community hall, there was space for the town clerk, and I gladly moved into the community hall. The next year I ran for town treasurer and town collector. This was the first time one person held all 3 positions. I felt the townspeople trusted me with these offices. Linda and I had a friendship, and so many times our paths crossed, including when I purchased her home at 30 Maple Ave after she had passed.
My father enlisted some help from local boys instead of having me help him out, probably with the encouragement of my mother. I married one of those boys on January 24th, 1894, Herbert Walter Wheeler, who was a boy who lived just up the street from us. He took over for my father and became station agent instead of me just before we were married. Herbert's intention was for me to stay home and raise children. He had done some traveling and had spent some time in South Dakota. Boys could do that, girls could not. So one day he did. He hopped a train and left. But I was just as happy. I took over as a station master on November 7th, 1898. In the earliest 20th century, the railroad had their expectations were when a station agent took over a station, the whole family would pitch in and do all the jobs required. The station agent was responsible for maintaining inside and outside the station. They were required to sell tickets, keep records, call for trains, lug baggages, sort the mail, carry the bags, move the freight, service and hang out the lanterns, and all the other communications. It was a big job. And when my father started in 1888, there was only 4 arrivals and departures between the hours of 9:30 and 6:30. My father also had a farm to run. He did not have to worry about telegraph and selling tickets then, but he did need somebody to be there to help with passengers and their needs, and unloading and loading the freights. He was glad for my help. By the time Herbert took over, he and I were running the station together. There were 4 more trains added. There were 8 arrivals and departures between the hours of 6:30 and 7 p.m. I needed to learn to operate the telegraph, sell tickets, answer phones. I called the trains, but I enjoyed the outdoors. I built gardens and planted flowers. The railroad also allowed me to sell produce from my farm to the passengers, like apples and cheese and such like that. I am running the station alone now. Herbert and I used to share. Running the station is hard work, and I am up at dawn, headed to the station to get ready for the first trains. The station needs to be open. Passengers need to be greeted, who are waiting for the trains. I have to call the trains and put out the flags and light the lanterns. I have to prepare for the mail and for the mail to arrive, sweep the porch, tend the gardens, and Herbert was the one getting paid, not me. I did at least half the work, and then later on all the work with the pay that was far from equal.
Tell us about that equal pay.
Well, Herbert was getting paid about $1.48 a day. That was less than $500 a year. To put that into some perspective, my cousin's daughter-in-law is a nurse, and she is supporting her family and her in-laws, making around $1,000 a year. The railroad has no problem giving me the job, but they're not going to pay me what they paid Herbert. They only pay me about 1/3. I'm making about 60 cents a day, doing all the work myself. Thankfully, I have the farm. My parents are both gone now, and I have inherited the homestead. So between the railroad and my farm, I have an income of about $5,000 annually. The railroad's small salary is just a fraction of my annual income, about $200 out of that $5,000. I have cattle and I have crops to tend to, along with everything around the station. But the station is where my heart is. It gives me everything I want in life, much to my mother's chagrin. I am independent, I am vital, I'm important, and I am appreciated. And thankfully, I have the farm, a farmhand, Mr. Edward Allen, who has been with my family for decades. He does the major work on the farm, and he helps me out around the station for those jobs that takes 2 people, like that Meshkapata sign. That's definitely a 2-person job. I'm not afraid of swinging a hammer, but I can't do that alone.
I worked at the Rutland Police Department, and as we heard earlier, it was here in this building. And I started as the police department clerk in 1977, and worked until my retirement in 2002. Our police department in this building was during most of the time, and as a female I was also one called as the police matron. And I was called whenever there was an incident with a female that involved some interventions, and I took many rides in the police cruiser to the Worcester Police Department where the jail cell was, riding in the cruiser with a female being there. For those that can remember, our police station, as you know, is on the other side of this wall, but computers came along when I was the police department clerk. And I embraced learning what was needed to keep the records of the police department. I was a great typer. I had learned that when I went to high school. All of us girls had to take typing. So I used my typing skills with a lot of confidence to succeed with a computer. As a police clerk, I also was presented the opportunity to do some road detail, directing traffic. So I was directing traffic down on Route 122, down by the Ocam line. It was in the summer, and I think it rained every single day. The good news is I was kept pretty dry because I had my hat on with the little plastic covering, as well as the long raincoat that went pretty much down to my ankles. I was dry. I'd like to tell you about a little incident that happened here in this building, in what was the police department at the time. In the room over there, in the little alcove where the windows are, that was our holding cell, if you'd like to call it. There was a nice grab bar on the wall that, you know, prisoners or people that had been arrested, they would be handcuffed to. So one time, I'm sitting there at my desk, and the gentleman that was handcuffed to the grab bar yanked it off the wall, came over to me and said, with the handcuffed in the grab bar, asking me, well, what do you want me to do with this? The good news, the gentleman was not that violent, and it was okay. I was fine. I won't forget that.
And you needed the police too, didn't you, Maddie?
Yeah, my station is very inviting. We live a long way from the center of town, and some local teens like to break in and steal all the candy out of my vending machines. One year, I think it was 1907, my station was broken into 3 times in 4 months. The candy wrappers were strewn from the station all the way to the state sand. Louis Hamp thinks he knows who the teen is, but I'm not so sure. The break-ins keep happening. Maybe they think I'm a pushover because I'm a woman, or either way, it's no big deal. I don't need the money. They can keep the 13 cents.
Frida?
I worked in town teaching 8th grade for 15 years and retired in 1961 when my husband retired.
I worked as a substitute teacher at Wachusett, and then I worked in the Thayer Memorial Library in Lancaster for several years as my children were growing up. I later worked in the library in Rutland and introduced some new activities for children. I went on to become a library trustee for 24 years. Nelson and I were big supporters of the new library building in 2001. I don't like to draw attention to it, but if you look above the door of the kitchen meeting room downstairs, you will see there is a plaque above the door with our names on it, which was quite an honor.
I was on the library board of trustees also at the same time with Nelson, and really enjoyed working with him as the clerk of the works. I was really proud of our new library building, and I liked the color of it so much that I had my own house painted that color.
Madame Jamel, tell us about yourself as a savvy businesswoman.
So I didn't have the formal education that a lot of young women had, so I had to work extra hard. I wasn't book smart, but I was clever. So I always had to fight to prove myself, to be taken seriously because of my background. But I was ambitious and I did succeed. So after my husband and I returned from Paris, I had taken over responsibility of rebuilding our wealth because we had spent a little too much in Paris. And I made some incredibly fruitful investment decisions. Our home became very well known. So we would entertain celebrities. I wanted more and more celebrities to come to our home, so I exaggerated a little bit which celebrities had actually been there. But our home is filled with treasures, even today filled with treasures. So we had been given gifts by Napoleon Bonaparte. We have some beautiful French pieces that we brought back from Paris. I became extremely well known, and I was the wealthiest woman in New York City. I loved to sail on our ship. My husband named it the Eliza, after me. And it was a common occurrence to see me riding in New York on my 8-horse chariot, completely unnecessary, but beautiful. I was having a great time.
Faith
So,
played,
there's more. There's more. So, after Stephen passed, I actually had both Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr competing for my attention. So neither was particularly interesting to me, but obviously Aaron won that battle. Some did say I was beautiful, and I admit that I may have used that to my advantage in the ways of business. I certainly cared very much about my appearance, and although I like to believe that I am a very good businesswoman, and I am, but because of my background, I did what I could to get ahead, even if that meant using my appearance to get the attention of those who could maybe help me move my business forward.
So faith played a large role in your lives. Will you share that with us?
Richard and I joined the Congregational Church. We were in town, and our children went to Sunday school as well as the youth group. A lot of my friends were members of the church. I was on the pastoral committee as well as music committee, and really enjoyed working a lot on these church suppers with the Monday Club.
And I grew up in the Congregational Church. My family has participated since they came to Rutland. I have served as church clerk, church secretary, Sunday school superintendent, deaconess, reaching out to the congregation in any way I could. I also lived next door to the parsonage and would sometimes help out in emergencies. Reverend Price praised me for keeping whatever I saw confidential. I loved my church. I could often be found in the kitchen preparing church suppers for the community.
After I married Nelson and came to Rutland, I joined the family church, the Rutland Congregational, and became active. I served on the pastoral committee, the mission committee, as a Sunday school teacher, and worked on many suppers with the Monday Night Club members. I supported the Church World Service initiatives like blankets for third world countries. You could always find me at the church fairs selling items for Serve International, benefiting craftspeople in third world countries. While serving on the mission, I helped to start the Croc Walk, which raised thousands of dollars for Church World Service over the years. We walked and we worked behind the scenes as well. My faith has always been strong. It carried me through difficult times, like the unexpected loss of my mother and later the loss of my son Richard, and the other ups and downs of life. One thing I did over the years was keep a journal of prayers and poems that I liked. In that journal, you can see the importance of my faith, and the way I viewed life was rather open-minded. I remained open to elements from other faiths that resonated with my beliefs.
My Irish Catholic faith has always been central to my life. I joined St. Patrick's Church and remained there my whole life. I have been a parish council member, a lector, ecumenical council member, prayer chain coordinator, bereavement ministry, Eucharistic minister, mission committee, St. Vincent de Paul member, and a member of the Women's Guild. In 1968, I was part of a committee to organize an ecumenical Thanksgiving Eve service, which continues today with my church and the First Congregational Church of Rutland. As a member of the Worcester County Ecumenical Council, I was the representative to the Diocese of Worcester. I was a founding member of the Worcester Diocesan Council of Priests, Religious, and Laity, which was instrumental in bringing to local fruition the work of the Second Vatican Council. In my retirement, I stayed active in my church, visiting shut-ins, attending Tuesday morning Bible study, and attending Mass daily. And on the ecumenical note, when my husband Bob died, we had his funeral at the Congregational Church, but we had his luncheon at St. Patrick's.
Ed and I attended the Rutland Congregational Church all that time when we were in Rutland. We had our 50th anniversary celebration there. I was part of the Monday Night Club Ladies Organization. I was also past matron of the Persis Putnam Order of the Eastern Star. I did oil paintings of the First Congregational Church several times, and sometimes the paintings were given as gifts. One to Deacon Emeritus Howard S. Davis received one. And some of my paintings are here in this building.
My family has always been members of the First Congregational Church, and since we were lifetime members, I have remembered them in my will.
Some of you showed some resistance to what people might expect of you as a woman. Can you tell us about that?
At first, my father turned over the station to Herbert. He wanted me to stay at home and raise kids. I really never wanted kids, but that was expected, and my mother was happy. I did try to be a good wife, but the kids didn't come, and Herbert got antsy. Just a couple of years into our marriage, he knew they never would, and he took off. I heard he did find somebody new and had a couple of kids. When he left, I took over the entire operation myself on the 7th of November, 1898. That's the way I like it. Outdoors, hands in the dirt, being productive. Miss Stephanie Griffin described me as a strong, self-reliant woman. Of course I'm strong. I have to lug all that mail. And the steam trunks aren't light. I am self-reliant because I like it that way. I have depended on some other people, like my father and Mr. Allen, but not very many. I feel like if you want a job done right, you got to do it yourself. I am not a person who embraces modern conveniences. I absolutely do not need electricity. They're not reliable. The electricity goes out all the time, out our way. I just as soon rely on my kerosene stove and my ice chest.
I guess I went outside the norm for my day. Ed wrote me a love letter 2 weeks before we were married in 1924, saying, "I love you with your bobbed hair more than ever." This was in 1924, and I was keeping up with the flapper styles of the time. He also wrote me a letter saying, in regard to Rachel helping you to put the finishing touches on owning a Ford, I have no objection. This was in 1924. Cars were unusual, and here I was going to get one for myself and learn to drive.
So I completely went against the expectations of women of my time in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Over and over again, I feel they are simply unfair expectations. So as a woman, I'm supposed to embody submissiveness, domestication, center my life around my family and my husband, be a subordinate to my husband. I was expected to have a very limited life, both publicly, personally, but I wasn't satisfied with that. So I am clever, I am a schemer, I am a strong businesswoman. I was stronger than either of my husbands. I've spent my life trying to be taken seriously because of my poor background. I've hidden that story for most of my life. I've worked my way out of poverty through some unsavory means. So I did work in workhouses with my sister Polly, but I also worked in brothels. And I made money however I could make money because I wanted to change my future. I wanted to leave that life behind, even if it meant a little bit of manipulation to move me forward. I've been a mistress more than once. I've had lavish gifts bestowed upon me. So my family appearances have certainly not been traditional. I do have an illegitimate son. I had him when I was living in Providence. I named him George Washington Boeing, but I did not raise him. So some say he actually looks just like General George Washington, which is not at all surprising because there is some talk that I love that General George Washington might be my father. It's claimed that I am too smart, too intelligent to have the father, John Bowen, that I did. I must have a different father. And I like to push that theory. I did adopt my niece Mary. So Mary was the daughter of Polly, my half-sister, and she lived with us in New York City along with her husband. I didn't have any other children. Something else that I did that was a little out of the ordinary is I filed for divorce against Aaron Burr, not the other way around. That was unheard of. That was not something women were supposed to do. Divorce was uncommon at that time already, and for a woman to file for divorce against her husband was unheard of. I was also not supposed to manage my own property or control my own money, but I do, and I do it well, and I do it better than the men around me. So it is true that I have broken most of the rules of my time, but I wouldn't have had it any other way. I had a very exciting life.
3 of you had 4 children, and 1 of you had 2 children. How did you incorporate your family with your work and your volunteer positions?
Well, it's interesting that you should ask about family with work and volunteering. We had 2 daughters, Lynn and Deborah. In the 70s, I started as a dispatcher when the police and fire phone coverage was brought into the same coverage system. I was a work-from-home pioneer, really doing dispatch before other people were even working from home. I did this along with Joan Viner, Nancy Stoddard, Sue Witcher, and we were the ones that doing the weekday coverage from 5:55 at night through the following morning, and then coverage on the weekends, starting on Fridays at 5:55 to Monday morning when Vicki Tarbell would take over during the day shift. All of us had phone lines for both the police and fire in our homes. We had the radio system, and we would blow the siren on the fire station whenever there was a fire, and we'd use the microphone and radio system to talk with dispatchers across the region and other towns, along with our own people using our call signs. At 5:55, we would test the siren and intercom and its ability for all to ensure that everything was in working order, including the sirens and the scanners and the radio equipment that we were working with. As the blue and red phones were in all of our homes, the phones all rang at the same time. When you were not working, you had to remember to silence it. Otherwise, you'd be woken up or bothered. The phones were in our kitchens and also in our bedrooms. Luckily, I was a light sleeper. I loved to bake and would always have goodies available for the officers on duty, or anyone else for that matter, who would come by to discuss business. And let me tell you, the house was always busy. All sorts of wonderful folks came over. The coffee was always on. When the blue phone rang and the police officers were visiting, they knew exactly where to go. If they were not there, I'd use the radio system to communicate, at all times keeping a paper log of all of the activities that were going on. Work for the town of Rutland and volunteering for the town was very important to me. I was also an active member of the 4th of July committee, on that committee since 2002. I was one of the leaders of the townwide yard sale in the very early years up until my passing. And during that time, we raised over $50,000 at the townwide yard sale with the map fees, and all that went to the 4th of July. Maps for the for the townwide yard sale cannot go out before 7 a.m. And anytime I volunteered for the town events, it was a family affair. I enjoyed and was skilled at behind the scenes work.
And I had 4 children, Robert, Judy, Alan, and Jane. Sadly, I lost a daughter named Jacqueline in her infancy. I was involved in the Parent-Teacher Association and in Girl Scouts. Irene and I would lead the Halloween parades each year for the kids, the 2 of us wearing our clown costumes. Remember walking in those clown shoes, Irene? Those were really something. I lived near the center of town and would have Jane in the stroller with the other 3 tagging along trying to keep up. We would walk to the church to do some volunteer work or to a church or town function. I had a part in the play George Washington Slept Here, put on by the church volunteers, and my family really got a kick out of watching me on that stage performing.
I had 4 children also, Bruce, Richard, Mary, and Elizabeth. There was 10 years between the oldest and the youngest. I didn't work outside the home initially, but waited until they were more independent. but we taught them to take part in the work we did at home, especially with our big garden. I was a 4-H leader and tried to pass on to them skills in gardening, cooking, and sewing. We also all participated in Sunday school and many other church activities. When they were grown, most of my children started practicing a form of Buddhism, which initially was a surprise. But as we got to understand it more, we came to accept it and appreciate that they had a form of faith they could use for their own struggles in life.
Bob and I had 4 girls, starting with Karen Ruth. Christine Elaine was born on June 9th, 1953, right during the tornado. I was at Hahnemann Hospital and witnessed the overwhelming need for medical attention from Worcester residents. And I was also at that time very worried about my Rutland family. I had Martha Ann and then Lynn Mary. After accepting the town clerk job, I told my husband Bob we might never have a family vacation again. But we did. We had many wonderful trips. I had to manage an office, working at home, 4 children, and that dog. And we all did church activities and town activities as a family.
Some of you got to travel, some very close and some at a distance. Tell us about your travels.
Well, I remember when I was 11 years old, it was a big deal to take my first ride in an automobile. We went all the way to Princeton. And the roads were all dirt covered and very bumpy.
So as a young person, my family did travel, but it was more out of necessity because we were pushed from town to town due to being in poverty. This was hardly enjoyable. But once we arrived in Providence and I began to find ways to make money and that allowed me to buy shoes, buy makeup, buy nicer clothes, I started to get the attention of various sailors who had passed through. My first big trip was with Captain Curry. So he took me to New York City. That was my first trip to New York City. When I was there, I met Jacques Delacroix, who was a Frenchman. And at his home in New York City, I learned the art of entertaining, which I found that I loved. We also traveled to France, and that's where I learned French for the first time. I learned the French customs, and I absolutely loved it. I continue to adore entertaining. And it was at this point that I reinvented myself as Eliza. So prior to this, I was known as Betsy, my childhood name. But I reinvented myself as Eliza. Despite my confidence, though, that I kind of portrayed to the world, deep down, I truly feared that people would find out the truth of my past, the truth of where I came from, my poor beginnings, that lack of formal education. I was afraid of the judgment, and I fought my entire life to remake myself into a woman of high society. And when my family moved to North Carolina, I went along with them, and that is where I met my first husband, Stephen. And with him, we went to Paris, and I was in Paris with him for 10 years. I love traveling abroad, I love learning the culture, but also the ability to present whatever version of myself I wanted to present. Travel gave me that freedom.
Ed and I tent camped throughout New England. We even went to Yellowstone National Park and tented out there. We had a cottage in Yarmouth in a church campground along with other Rutland families, including the Cawkinses. It was a long ride to the Cape at that time because we had to go down 140. There was no major highways to get there.
Yes, we enjoyed going to that place also. So in the 1980s, Nelson and I became very involved with Heifer Project, the new site in Rutland, and we became hosts for international visitors to the HBI farm, which was very interesting. Nelson was able to travel to Africa with Heifer Project. I was able to travel with him when he was working for Norton Company. In the 70s, he frequently worked in Poland. At that time, I was able to take several trips with him. We went to Europe, the UK, Eastern Europe, and several countries in Asia. We also traveled to visit children and family members around the US and Canada.
Janet, do you remember going to Scotland
Oh,
for their
yes.
wedding?
Oh,
with a
the
few
wedding.
oth-
Oh,
for-
the wedding.
With a few other Rutland people.
We
And we
did.
had to, when you go to a wedding in Scotland or England, you have to get the hat. So we all had to go get those hats.
Oh, we
We
did.
had to rent them for the day of the wedding. And the wedding was in a castle, and we spent the wedding night in a castle with the reception there, and it was fabulous.
Oh, it was wonderful.
It was
And-
like moving Rutland from here to Scotland. It was wonderful.
And do you remember the men in the kilts?
Yeah, men in the
Oh,
kilts,
men in the
yeah, it was
kilts,
wonderful.
yeah. Oh, just a wonderful time. And those hats.
Yeah, those hats.
We live in a rural area. How did nature and horticulture play a role in your life?
I use nature as a canvas for my painting. I love the scenes of Rutland and also Cape Cod. I painted flowers, trees, and rustic settings. I taught painting classes at the Wood Studio, which is behind this house, right over there. I also hooked rugs and had open houses at my home to display my work.
Nelson and I grew most of our own produce. I would can and freeze it for the winter. We even got the children involved. We helped them enter their produce in summer fairs and compete for prizes. We bought a used greenhouse in the late 70s and had it moved to our homestead. I grew seedlings in the winter and sold them in the spring. I read an interesting book called Diet for a Small Planet in the early 70s. I recognized our planet was at risk for climate change, so I started trying to cook meals using less meat. I also studied about growing herbs and using organic gardening methods. Working with nature and reducing harm to the environment, to the natural world, has always been important to me.
I loved getting outside and planting things. My father and I would plant apple trees along East County Road. The apples are amazing. Have you ever had a Rutland grown apple? My grandfather's uncle ran cattle up north to Canada and brought back the most delicious apples you have ever tasted. The Rutland folk called them none such, because there was none such apple around here. The family planted them all around. I helped around the farm as well during planting and harvesting times. I planted flowers around the station. The gloxinias were my favorite. The railroad loves my work. I've won many awards from the railroad over the years with their station beautification projects. The trains stopped coming regularly in 1926. Just the milk and the mail. And then later, but I kept the station looking as nice as I could. In 1932, the railroad couldn't justify keeping my station open any longer. On the last day, the mail carrier watched as I swept the floors, wiped the windows, and gave the flowers one more last drink of water. I locked the doors. For the last time, it was a very sad day. But I'm happy I was able to spend my whole life outside. I was 60 then, and Mr. Allen and I kept the farm running as long as we could. I didn't sell it for another 20 plus years. Outside in the dirt well into my 80s, smelling the fresh air, the freshly tilled soil, that's my heaven.
4th of July has been a wonderful event through the years. How have you participated?
Well, before the parade started in 1948, we had what they called the coaching parades. And people came from all the surrounding towns with their horses and buggies and coaches to show their horses and decorate their buggies and horses, and there was prizes awarded, and it was a grand time and very festive.
Well, the parade and the fireworks are my favorite 4th of July activity. I was on the 4th of July committee since 2002, and I loved helping to plan everything. Really was very honored one year when my husband and I were the Grand Marshals. I was very, very happy to have that honor. It's really quite a happy memory in my time.
I was a member of the Recreational Council, the Grange, and so many other organizations. It was difficult to know which one needed help with the float for the parade. One year, we needed evergreen boughs, but we didn't want to strip Rutland of boughs. So, we went to Paxton and collected them there. I was always thinking of Rutland. Not sure if that was stealing or not. Our lawn was filled with people watching the parade, but I was usually marching with one organization on a float or with Irene Amston when we dressed as clowns and handed out balloons. That was really something.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes,
We'd blow up the balloons on the top floor of Community Hall,
Yep.
and we'd have them all laid out, hundreds of them, and then we'd get in Julia Lemontinen's Model A, and then we'd drive up and down the parade route giving out balloons dressed as clowns.
Exactly. Standing on those running
Standing
boards,
on the
praying
running
we
board.
didn't fall with the balloons in our hands.
With Julia driving.
Yep. We managed.
We did. I was also honored and chosen as a Grand Marshal when I retired. And my family continued to be on the committee, the 4th of July committee, with my oldest daughter Karen for 20 years as the chairperson for the 4th of July.
Claire White and I were chosen to be the Grand Marshals for the parade for the time we had given to the Rutland Public Library. That was quite an honor.
Ed and I were also honored by being chosen to be Grand Marshals, and that's an honor of a lifetime.
Are there other organizations that we haven't talked about in town that you have supported through the years? Except the Historical Society, we'll get to that in a minute.
I was a member of the Rutland Grange. I was past president of the Rutland Retirees. I was director of the American Association of Retired Persons. And because I was a former teacher, I was a member of the Southern Worcester County Teachers Association and the Massachusetts Association of Retired Teachers.
I was secretary of Rutland Grange for many years. I supported the Red Cross and marched in the Memorial Day Parade for the Red Cross and the auxiliary. I worked to promote support for the Salvation Army. I organized a strawberry festival each year, picking, sorting, and preparing the berries, and selling them on those homemade biscuits with cream. That reminds me, I would always host after-town meeting sessions at my home. There were always a long list of people all talking at once and enjoying my homemade strawberry shortcake. Everyone was trying to get their point across. Conversations such as, "Did you hear what Art Smith said about such and such?" That was probably enough to influence the vote. Can you believe people are that naive? I was also a founding member of the Historical Commission in 1973. There were many Rutland groups that I was not leading or a part of, which kept me busy.
The two jobs of town clerk and the librarian kept me very busy during the day, but I did attend the Monday night club at the Congregational Church, and also I attended the Grange, since it was always after work.
I was a member of the Rutland Communications Study Committee in 1979 and 1980. And that committee was formed to have a centralized emergency dispatch system operating from the fire station, which came into being in 1986. I was a founding member of the Historical Commission, along with Charlotte too, and really enjoyed working on the Historical Commission. We had a lot of accomplishments. We started an inventory for the State Historical Commission, the states. We got a grant to begin the restoration of the old burial ground. We worked to facilitate permission to tear down Jack Collins's home in order to make way for the new fire station in 1977. And later, we restored the wood studio behind us for use. I was also an active in the Fire Department Aid Brigade fundraising for the fire department for the first Jaws of Life. We could not formally, as women, we could not formally join the fire brigade at that time. It was men only, but we all found a way to be supportive, working side by side with our husbands and male friends. It was a family affair all the time, with fundraising, events, and community involvement.
I started a used clothing pantry in the basement of our home, in that office that my husband had put together for the town clerk once we moved out of a house into community hall. I saw a need in the community and I did something about it. The community could come and get clothing if they were in need. The cellar door was always open so they could come in. From there, the Rutland Food Pantry started between the two churches. I was on the Council on Aging, enjoyed the senior center, and was on some championship Wii bowling teams.
We are here this afternoon at the Historical Society. Can you tell us about your involvement here, if you had any?
I was a charter member of the Rutland Historical Society, which was formed in 1965. We worked hard to get it started after many years to preserve Rutland's history. I have served in many offices, including president, and served as curator for many years.
I joined the Historical Society in the early 70s. I was the chair of the summer flea markets and co-chair of the antique shows at Naquag School along with Betty Meager. We did fundraising in 1983 to replace the Civil War soldier on top of the monument. He had blown down in the hurricane, 1938. I was part of the founding committee of the Festival of Trees. I'm a past president of the society and member of the curatorial committee. And we worked with Sheriff Lou Evangelitis to have the prisoners paint this building. I worked with a small group of town members to research and publish a book. And Foundations of a Town is the name of that book. And certainly preserving Rutland's history is very important to me.
I was a charter member of the Rutland Historical Society, and since my family goes way back in the history of Rutland, I was anxious to preserve some of the artifacts. So I was able to donate several items to the society over the years, including the Revolutionary Soldier's uniform on display in the other room.
I was also a charter member and became the first president of the newly formed Historical Society in 1965. Because we were losing the old red schoolhouse to demolition, it was important to find a place to store some of our memorabilia, and I led a fund drive raising to raise money to acquire a building.
Ed and I were charter members of the Historical Society. I loved history and shared what I knew about Rutland history with my classes. I would often send them out in back of the old red schoolhouse, that's where I taught, the old building, where they could sketch the old burial ground and some of the gravestones in it. Excuse me. I loved history and I lived a lot of history. I was born before people were driving around in cars, they were in horse and buggies, and I lived to see man go to the moon. So I thought I lived in one of the most interesting times that we had.
I think there's even some of your paintings here, are there not?
Yes, there are.
Nelson and I were members of the Historical Society. The Calkins family has lived in Rutland for generations and has a tendency to collect things. So we were able to donate many items, including some Calkins family photos, paintings done by Nelson's mother, and other treasures. There's actually a couple in this room. My wool ski pants, which I wore to go ice skating, are also on display along with my ice skates. It feels good to be part of the collection.
Our last question for the afternoon is for all of you. Briefly, what do you think is your significant contribution to our community? Your gift is not a tangible item, but a very good reason that we shall always remember you, and a great reason why you're being recognized this afternoon. We'll go right around the room, starting with Linda Ham.
I believe that my legacy from my family for the continuation of serving as town clerk for the town of Rutland for over 100 years was my legacy. I got to know residents from their birth to their death, and in between all the good things and bad things that happened to them, and I got to see children of many generations grow up.
I guess I'm most proud of the things that still carry on, the ecumenical service. every Thanksgiving. This Historical Society, which is a great asset to the town of Rutland. The 4th of July activities that I was involved with, and most especially the Rutland Food Pantry, which has continued all these years.
I always thought of myself as a townie. I was a Wheeler, descended from a long line of Wheelers, and my family passed their love of Rutland on to me. I felt privileged to live in this friendly, caring, small town, so I was happy to contribute where I could. I felt connected with all the organizations that I volunteered for, and do hope that I made a significant contribution to all of them by showing up for all that I was able to.
I like to think that there are two main contributions that I've made to this community. So the first is bringing attention to this beautiful town. So I have become quite well known over the course of my life. And when people learn of my story, they learn of Rutland. So it's a place they may not have otherwise had any knowledge of. And then secondly, I hope that I bring inspiration. I only resided in this town for 3 years, but Rutland was one of the many stops along my incredible life. Although my life was sometimes challenging, it is the life that got me here today, and Rutland was one of those stops on the long life that I've had that has got me to where I am today. Rutland is part of my story. I do hope that my story is proof that you can break free from whatever mold it is that you think you're in. You must believe in yourself, especially the women out there. You can break the patterns of poverty, you can break the patterns of poor education. You can find your own way in the world, and I am proof of this.
As a teacher, I hope I instilled a love of learning in my students. I tried to use different methods of teaching, some which were more successful than others. One unsuccessful attempt involved television. This was in the 50s. Television was new, and not everyone had one. Those who did had only one for the whole family. It was usually black and white with an antenna on the roof. Rutland had good reception because it was so high up. So I assigned a television program that I thought would be good for the students. Unfortunately, it was the same night as the Winter Olympics, which were being shown for the first time from Europe. The class complained mightily because their families had planned on watching the Olympics, and I withdrew that assignment. I also thought students should know about the place where they lived and the people who came before them. I taught Rutland history, beginning with the Indians selling the 12-mile square to some men from Lancaster. Few, if any, students had ever heard the name Naquag at that time. I told them about Madame Jamel, leaving out the brothel part. This was the 50s. And I also sent the students out to sketch the old burial ground. Between Ed and I, we taught generations of Rutland families. I decided on a career in teaching before World War I and entered Fitchburg Normal School before women had the right to vote. Many working women ended their career when they got married. I did not. I continued to teach until 1961 when we both retired.
Nelson and I believed that we had a responsibility to try to make the world a better place. And that feeling was what inspired us to be so involved in our community and the world. I think that during our time here, we did make a difference for people near and far. I hope that through our actions, we inspired our children and others that we worked alongside to carry our efforts forward. I believe our contributions to the library, the church, HPI, and even to this historical society are continuing to help others today.
Certainly being instrumental in building the infrastructure of our town, as our town was growing, all the time making sure that we preserved history was really important to me. And really the friendships that one can have with volunteering is just a precious gift. And I'm very grateful to all that I've worked with.
I never set out to have any great contribution. I just got up every day like the rest of you. I put one foot in front of the other. There was always work to be done, people to serve, horses to be fed, flowers to be planted. There were patients that needed their mail from their loved ones. What I hope, I guess, is to inspire women and girls like me who didn't want to be tied to the kitchen cooking or indoors all day raising children. The conventional thing was just not for me. If you strive to be in the great outdoors, go be outdoors. Find what works for you, what gives you pleasure. Find purpose by doing the things that sing to your heart. Whether it's the whistle of an incoming train or not, whether it's talking to people headed for a city, or finding someplace that's quiet and away from people, whether it's getting the milk off the train, or whether it's the milkman. Whether you're a girl or a boy, find joy, pleasure, and pride in what you do. I guess I'm a role model for those who seek work that may not be traditional or conventional. But if it sings to you, do it. To hell with tradition or convention, and to hell with rumors or gossip. What does matter is live your best life with no regrets.
Thank you very much.